Well, now it's that time of the week where we review some of the big headlines of the past few days.
The American economist Richard Thaler has won the Nobel Prize for his work in behavioral economics.
Behavioral economics is simply the addition of human beings into economic models. We misbehave. We eat too much, we exercise too little, we smoke.
Japanese steel giant Kobe now says that 500 of its customers have been affected by its quality scandal. The number had previously been around 200.
It's been carrying out an investigation for a week. Finding out who has bought this stuff is, in fact, a very complicated process.
What type of reality do you prefer? Apple boss Tim Cook said augmented reality, because the alternative, virtual reality, is isolating and antisocial.
I'm excited about AR because I can see uses for it everywhere. It doesn't isolate. VR does the opposite.
Our commentators this week: David Dwyer, Global Director of Research at Bloomberg Intelligence. He joined us from Hong Kong. And Nina Trentman of the Wall Street Journal here in London.
The Nobel Prize was something, and a little bit controversial because behavioral economics is something that not all economists agree with. But I think it was a great move going in that direction.
When you say other economists don't agree, where do they pick holes?
Well, I think we have a big economics group at Bloomberg. And what I think you'll see is that economics is a very mathematical approach, really believes in market economies. But we all know that humans are not always rational, and I think behavioral economics is a terrific field that goes into trying to understand how human behavior affects economics.
Is there a suspicion then that this is kind of a bit obvious to win such a massive prize?
Well, I don't know if it's obvious. I think it's just a change in the perspective of how economics is looked at. It's a great field, but I've always looked at things such as stock markets, and you talk to one person and they think a stock looks really attractive when it's down. Another person, they're scared to lose out if a stock is up. And so it's just different perspectives from different people.
Nina, it's interesting when the award was announced, Richard Thaler said, well, a lot of money at stake here, 9 million Swedish krona. I'll try to spend it as irrationally as possible.
Yeah, of course, that's, I guess, in the end, following through on his work and what he's done before, which I'd be interested to see what he's going to spend it on, because given that he knows so much more about rationality and irrationality than we as human beings and as day-to-day actors realize, it'd be interesting to see what kind of things he would be spending it on.
Despite the disagreements that we've heard outlined within the field of economics, interesting that he's had his followers, some fairly high-profile ones, including former Prime Minister here, David Cameron, who set up a nudge unit, and that's had offshoots in Singapore, in Sydney, in New York, as well as here in the UK.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and that you're pointing that out, because I'm quite aware of the fact that he, in the end, like in the past couple of years, we've seen quite a number of politicians, think tanks, organizations outside of the economics field to take up on this idea and trying to, in the end, transfer these ideas that Mr. Thaler has pointed out to other decision-making processes. Like I'm aware, like in China, for example, where I was based before, that in terms of decision-making there, that you have think tanks that are trying to make use of that too. So it's quite interesting to see that in the end, this is not purely a concept that people are aware of in the world of economics and in the world of mathematics, as pointed out before.
Nina, take us into our second headline about Kobe Steel, because, of course, the most important spin-off of this problem at Kobe is the supply chain into the auto sector, into plane making and so on. A lot of companies having to do some very quick checks.
We're still waiting to hear what companies are saying, like which specific products have been affected. It is, of course, a huge issue for Japan as a country, which has in the past marketed itself as a maker of high-quality products that also justify a higher price premium, which Of course, in this specific area in steel, you have this issue that there's the demand for higher quality steels all over the world. You have car manufacturers wanting lighter steels, and you also then, of course, have increasing price pressure from manufacturers, for example, in China, where you have huge overcapacities of steel, mostly, of course, construction and building steel, but also where you have steel makers that are looking to go into these areas, higher value added areas where Kobe, for example, in the past has been.
How's this playing in the US, David? Because we're looking at names like General Motors, like Boeing. I think Boeing's already said, we don't think this is a safety issue for us, but a lot of people making some serious checks.
My concern always is that they do find there's a safety issue, and even more concerning is they find safety issues that are expensive to repair. And so this really gets out of hand for, a relatively small company. The other thing some of our research analysts have been working on is that this is not just a planes, trains, and automobiles type story. We actually had one of our technology analysts look into the hard disk drive market and found out that the vast majority of hard disk drives in your computers use aluminum from Kobe steel. So, there's obviously that increases the risk of potential failure if there are problems with those products.
Our final headline, Nina, VR versus AR. Are you intrigued or persuaded by either?
It's a good question. Well, I have more connections with AR than with VR. So, I don't know, of course, I'm sometimes using Snapchat filters, for example, which is more augmented reality than virtual reality. I think, of course, it's an interesting question that we have there, whether augmented reality is in the end allowing us to have more social interaction with others, whereas virtual reality is taking us away from that. Of course, these new technologies will all change the way how we're interacting, and I think at this point in time it's quite difficult to make statements on whether one would prefer AR or whether one would actually prefer VR, or whether there's not in the end a totally new form of how we're interacting, and so these existing codes of what to do, how to interact with people would maybe overwritten or at least be amended.
Yeah, I've got to say that our technology analysts, many of them are avid gamers, do talk quite a bit about AR, and they have written and talked about the fact that many people focus more on VR, and they sort of agree with Tim Cook that there are great opportunities in AR. And you're going to start seeing more and more of that shortly. iOS 11 is available in that. There's some early stages of Google. It's all still a little on the primitive side, but it is probably going to take off, and in a lot of ways more enticing than having to wear those goggles.
Thanks to David Dwyer, Global Director of Research at Bloomberg Intelligence, speaking there from Hong Kong, also from the Wall